Welcome to Behind the Books, the podcast that takes you into the minds of our Master of Liberal Arts faculty. I'm your host, Tristan Cabello, Associate Director of the MLA program, and in each episode, we'll explore the multifaceted world of the liberal arts through the eyes of our professors. Join us as we uncover the ideas, the inspirations, and the intellectual pursuits that drive their teaching and research. Whether you're a student, a scholar, or simply a lifelong learner, tune in and gain a deeper understanding of the liberal arts from those who live and teach them every day. And today I'm joined by Dr. Mary Furgol, who is a professor in the Master of Liberal Arts. Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, Tristan, and thank you. This is a great opportunity.
Thank you. And so the first question that I always have for our instructors in the program in this podcast is, can you introduce yourself? Can you tell me more about your academic, your professional journey, and what led you to join the Master of Liberal Arts?
Oh, sure. I think it's important, Tristan, to point out I was educated in Britain, and you'll appreciate this. You have to narrow in on your area of study quite early in high school, and then go on to study that subject almost exclusively at university.
Yeah, yeah.
So my trajectory was definitely dictated by that.
Uh-huh.
It's very different from an undergraduate degree here in the United States, and the
Hmm.
stakes seem very high when you're in high school
Yeah,
about making that decision so early.
yeah.
So, as a 16-year-old, my two great loves in high school were mathematics and history. And
Okay.
I switched back and forth almost daily, trying to decide which one to concentrate on. And then a new history teacher arrived in the school, and he
Hmm.
made history seem alive, immediate, full of sort of intellectual rigor. Um, and looking back, it was a similar skill set that attracted me to both disciplines. You know, a love of mapping data, looking for evidence and solutions, seeing permutations. And I think history in the end won out with me because of the humanistic elements within it, studying human nature, intent, and the results of our actions. And I was really drawn to it. So I went to the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, where I graduated with an MA and PhD in history. But I have to say, Tristan, I was determined when I finished that I was never going to teach. That was the one thing I was
Oh,
not
okay.
going to do.
Okay.
To explain, I came from a family of teachers, and
Yeah.
so I thought, "No, no, no, I'm not gonna be the one that keeps
Okay.
doing this, there's too many of us." So to get it out of my system, which is kind of telling, I guess, there must have been something niggling,
Yeah.
I took a year's teacher training course, and that was fatal. I fell in
Yeah.
love with
Yeah. Yeah.
teaching
Yeah.
and decided to pursue it after all. So that's what led me not
Yeah.
only to history, but then also to teaching. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, yeah, and this very important that you share your background, because we have a lot of international students in the program. I myself was educated in France first, which is very unlike the UK, where you have to focus very early on the topic, and then you cannot really deviate from that.
Mm,
But we have a lot of international students who are telling me when they join the program that well they feel a little bit intimidated by the fact that they are entering a new system, a
mm,
new educational system. And so I always tell them, well, we do have quite a few faculty who have an international background too, and that we are always, of course, here to help.
mm.
Another question that I have for you, Mary, is if you could talk about you teach you've been teaching in the program for quite a few years now, and I know that you teach a lot of courses, a lot of different courses. Can
Mhm.
you give us an overview of the courses that you teach, and also tell us more about your teaching style?
Sure, yes. As you said, I teach a number of courses.
Mhm.
One of them is a course on World War One, history, memory, and commemoration. So I prepared that course in anticipation of the centenary of World War One. So we launched it in fall of 2018, the centenary of the ending of World War One. And as you can tell from the title, it's not simply the history of World War One, not that that's simple, um, but it includes art, music, philosophy, ethics, museum studies, because we explore not only what happened in that war, supposedly to end all wars, but how it was remembered, how it's commemorated, and how it still resonates across the globe today. And because of the interest in that course, I then followed that on with offering a course on Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, which is a harrowing course, but I mean, is so vital, especially nowadays and with the recent events, for sure. I also teach British Victorian women, and my original research interests were in poverty and industrialization.
Yeah.
And that naturally led to looking at the topic of gender as well. Um, and also actually led to an interest in the social history of medicine, which is
Yeah.
another course that I
Yeah.
teach.
And so
Um,
that was, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, that's fine.
And so that was one of the questions that I had for you. You started talking about it. What are your fields of study? What kind of research do you do? What were your original interests in history?
Sure. So my initial research areas were primarily poverty and the impact of industrialization on approaches to dealing with poverty
Hmm.
as societies secularized and moved away from a church or faith-based approach
Yeah,
to poor relief, looking at how in the Industrial Revolution there were just so many people unemployed, for example, at the same time. How did societies deal with it? And sadly, this is still very pertinent too, because a lot of the vocabulary, Tristan, that developed during the 19th century is
yeah, yeah,
still
yeah,
around
yeah,
today. There are still assumptions that it's not the marketplace, it's something inherent in people that makes them poor.
yeah,
And so, yeah, I studied that a lot. And that, as I said, led me to looking at gender as well, because so many times, women became the focus of the home and of the expectations and standards in the home, and then lack
yeah,
of standards if there was poverty. So
yeah,
I'm very much rooted in the 19th century, but understanding or trying to understand theories of poverty kept pushing me also back to the Enlightenment and ideas of humanity, and those universal principles of the 18th century. So I'm kind of mid-18th century right up to
yeah.
Nazi Germany. That's kind of, although it started all with
Uh-huh.
industrialization and
Yeah.
poverty.
Yeah, and I have to tell our listeners today that we do have a YouTube video on our channel of one of your presentations,
Oh, yeah.
and so if they want to learn more about your research, can you talk also a little bit more about your academic and intellectual inspirations, and also if you could tell us about a book or an author or an article that had a significant impact in your intellectual journey.
Sure. I have to say my first inspirations were definitely my parents.
Uh-huh.
Um, Each of them was the first in their family to go to college.
Yeah.
My mother's father was a mailman, and my father's father was a miner, a coal miner.
Hmm.
And so it was remarkable that they broke out into higher education,
Yeah.
and it was definitely an inspiration. And especially because at a time when it wasn't so much, especially in Scotland,
Yeah.
expected to encourage women to go, they didn't make a difference. And they had sons and daughters, and we all felt that equally drawn to to pursue education. They didn't make a
Yeah.
difference, and that was huge.
Hmm.
Um, the other inspiration was that history teacher I talked about, the high
Yeah.
school
Yeah.
one,
Yeah.
who made us feel like we were all Russian revolutionaries,
Uh-huh.
and so many people began to wear trench coats though, and began to sort of
Oh wow.
have underground printing presses. Well, not quite that, but it
Uh-huh.
seemed to lend itself to that. And then obviously certain authors, I mean, the traditional ones, E.H. Carr, and his What is History, and Isaiah Berlin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but specifically with women's history and poverty, Gertrude Himmelfarb, the British historian, and a much less well-known person, Jill Stevenson from Edinburgh University, who was really the first person to look at women in Nazi Germany. She was unusual at Edinburgh in the history department because she was one of the very few women,
Yeah.
and she was remarkable. She really, really inspired me.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
And then in relation to the social history of medicine, which really was, as I said, a byproduct of interest of women and poverty. Foucault's Madness and Civilization
Uh-huh.
really
Uh-huh. Of course. Yeah.
inspired me in
Yeah.
relation to
Yeah.
considering approaches to public health issues and our
Yeah.
expectations and norms. And then the only other thing I would add is I did teach a global interdisciplinary course. And I was really with a literature professor as well as
Yeah.
art history and philosophy. And that's when I came across the works of people like Chinua Achebe and John Canny, the South African author,
Okay.
and
Hmm.
Yinka. And in
Yeah.
recent years, they have really inspired me too. So
Yeah.
a lot, quite a mix mash of different inspirations in that sense.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. And one last question that I like to discuss with our professors, it's also their hobbies and interests outside of the classroom, right? Because often those hobbies and interests are actually related to what they do in the classroom. So, what do you do outside of the classroom, Mary?
Well, I live in upstate New York. I
Uh-huh.
used to live in Maryland near DC.
Yeah.
We moved, I'm an emigre or immigrant, moved
Yeah.
from Scotland in the late 1980s. I've now lived slightly more years here than I did there. So that's kind of a
Uh-huh.
strange feeling, but
Yeah.
that
Of course.
obviously, yeah, informs my interests a great deal. I love traveling
Yeah.
back to Britain and to Europe.
Yeah.
Um, though I also greatly understand being a migrant, being an immigrant. You reach a point, and I'm sure this resonates with you too,
Yeah.
Tristan,
Yeah. Yeah.
where, I usually sum it up as the foreign becomes familiar and the familiar becomes foreign.
Yeah.
Uh, that I used to think that I knew Scotland, but every
Yeah.
time I go back, I realize it's moved on without me. It's really
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah. Yeah. Of
annoying.
course. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then as soon as I open my mouth here, people say, "Where are you from?" So I don't
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
quite like I belong. So a lot of my interests that translates into the classroom. I love
Hmm.
meeting people from all different backgrounds, all different countries. I feel I empathize with that and can contribute that in the
Yeah.
classroom to
Yeah. Yeah.
understand what it's like to literally be that fish out of water and
Of
try to
course. Hmm.
relate
Yeah.
yourself to other things. So, and then family is very important with me. I have
Uh-huh.
3 children and a slew of grandchildren.
Uh-huh.
So but again, I'm a social historian, so that works. I'm
Yeah.
sort
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
interested in family life and extended family life, and I really love technology. I really,
Uh-huh.
as soon as online teaching became a thing, I didn't embrace it immediately, but I was curious about it
Yeah.
immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of ties in with my teaching ideals too, because it is the one place where you do hear every student's voice.
Oh, absolutely.
You
I'm so
know,
glad you said
yeah.
that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that is so important because
That's so
so
important. Yeah.
I love teaching in the classroom. Don't get me wrong, I love
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
rapport. I love seeing the twinkle in people's eyes or
Yeah. Yeah.
if they're bored, I want to be able to
Uh-huh.
respond to that.
Uh-huh.
On the other hand, there were always some people who were just quiet. And sometimes
Yeah.
I knew that was just fine. That was just they didn't want to speak in public. But
Yeah.
other times I kept wondering, do they have something burning they want to say?
Of course. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
don't feel comfortable saying it. And so that aspect of the medium of online teaching, I really, really adore. So,
Yeah, yeah, and
yeah.
I'm so glad that you mentioned this, Mary, because this is also something that's very important to me in the online teaching. I
Mhm,
remember coming to this country and getting a PhD and being very shy because
mhm,
English was not my first language. And I was surrounded by students who were extremely smart and who
mhm,
could express themselves, beautifully in their native language. And I was, for a couple of semesters, extremely quiet
mm,
in the classroom. And
mhm,
if I had taken my classes online, I know that I would have certainly participated much more, right? So
Mm.
it's not that I had nothing to say. It's just that I was fearing saying something because that was not my native language.
Yeah.
Um, Mary, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us today. It was really very, very interesting. And to our listeners, I just want to tell them that we are releasing those podcast episodes every 2 weeks. So please do stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you again, Mary.
Oh, thank you, Tristan. I enjoyed chatting with you.